And we are live, virtually connecting with the Centennial Symposium at the American University in Cairo. Welcome everybody, my name is Christian, I'm your virtual buddy for today. I'd say we'd start with a quick round of introductions, maybe start on site and then take it to the virtual participants and see where this takes us.
Okay, I'm Catherine Cronin from the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education in Ireland. So delighted to be here in Cairo.
I'm Alec Kouros from the Faculty of Education, University of Regina in Regina, Canada.
Hi, I'm Nadina Bulmekt. I'm on-site buddy and I'm an instructional designer at CLT.
And I'm Maha Bailey. I'm Associate Professor of Practice at CLT here at AUC, and I'm the co-founder of Virtually Connect.
Maybe Mia, then Greg?
I'm Mia Zamora. I'm currently in New Jersey. I teach at Kane University.
I am Greg McVeary. I'm currently in Connecticut, USA, and I teach at Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, Connecticut.
All right. So we had some talk before we went online and checked out and tried to check out and talk about your keynotes as well. Quite a group you have on site there. So what's your impression from what is going on site? What's it like?
Wonderful.
Yeah, good. Yeah, sure. Okay. It's been a whirlwind for me. A really quick trip, but I'm really excited. It's been a wonderful hospitality, really great engagement from faculty. I just did a workshop just now on information literacy, fake news, and that sort of thing. And I think I've scared people, but they're really engaged with some of the solutions to this, or thinking about the solutions. Lots of connection, lots of deep thought, great engagement from students. So I think the level of engagement has been good. Some flies bugging me right now, but I don't know why it's targeted me. But yeah, it's been really a nice experience, and so thanks to Maha and everyone for bringing us.
Yeah. Likewise, it's been a really wonderful experience. Having participated in events like this before at my institution and others, Center for Learning and Teaching hosting an event for faculty and students, I felt there was much more student engagement at this one. I mean, sometimes these are scheduled at times of the academic year when the students aren't actually there because it's easier to get the faculty then, but then you don't get the interaction. So I thought that was a real strength of this event. And in particular, yesterday at the end of day one, there was a panel, a faculty-student panel, and that was very, very good. I imagine that will go forward. I did a workshop and a keynote today, and the workshop was interesting because I had suggested a topic that was similar to Alec's workshop. So I said to Maha, what else might be useful or interesting? And the topic that Maha and Hoda and CLT came back with was student partnership. So I couldn't stand there by myself and talk about student partnership. So that ended up being really generative change of plans because I engaged, I asked to engage with students here at AUC, which Maha facilitated, and I brought videos from 2 student associate interns at the National Forum, and all of the students spoke about how student partnership can enhance learning and enhance learning spaces. And so that seeded the discussion for the workshop, the students' inputs, and then there was a lively discussion at the tables. So I really enjoyed that.
I also liked how in that session, when the tables were sharing out later what they were doing, a lot of them let the students present. Yeah. And even when the students didn't present accurately what the faculty were saying, they didn't interrupt them because they let them have their say.
And Maha and I chose to use a couple of different liberating structures in that workshop. And Nadine, I just read your tweet about that you enjoyed the kind of discussion. So you might just say that just about the sharing the why behind what.
Sure. I actually, when they were facilitating the workshop, right, there were very first activity was a Think Fair Shares, or an addition of it, right?
Yeah.
And Catherine was explaining the reason behind doing this activity, like the pedagogical purpose behind an activity done this way, because it is a teaching and learning conference. And then she also explained the reason behind doing the liberating structures, the activity that we did, which was basically just, sharing that there's a facilitator and then sharing, responses to this one prompt question while holding one talking device, right? You know, whoever's talking, you know, needs to be the one doing all talking. Nobody's allowed to really interrupt, and then the listening has to be without judgment and like really active listening. And then there's another round of reflections also in that way, and then third and fourth rounds are discussions and interactions. And the explanation behind this was also very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. One thing though, people really were uncomfortable with not speaking. And because I was the facilitator on my own table, because like Maha said, you know, CLT person has to be sitting on these tables to facilitate. And people were so uncomfortable with not being able to interrupt the person in front of them. And I would look at them, I was like, please, you know, the rules and like the activity is designed in a way, like I had to be like a little, you know, diplomatic about it. But then people are like, no, I want to have a conversation. Let's just fast track through round 2 so we can get to the point where I can interrupt you and tell you how you're wrong. I'm like, what is this? And we're talking about student partnerships. It was just so interesting. And I played devil's advocate, and I was also like sharing all these questions that everybody had like these immediate responses to that were, you know, upset about what I was saying, but I did that on purpose still. I do that a lot. And everybody was like, the student was like, and everybody was like, no, don't talk and don't interrupt her. So that was very nice. It's fun.
One of the things that was inspiring for me is that I think both of your keynotes, because I know who you are though, I think inspired people to start thinking of, oh, how could I possibly do this in my class? I think they saw examples of different ways of looking at what they could possibly do. And then I also liked when I asked you that question that another faculty had asked, how'd you get into it? And he talked about different levels of openness and getting into it so that students still feel safe, and you don't have to go as a teacher all out to be able to let your students benefit from the possibilities.
Yeah, that's right. I think sometimes when we're very open, like all of us in this hang, oh, there's more people here. Hello, everybody. Hi, Ada.
Hi, Ada. Heard about you again.
Ada.
Yeah, that's right.
Going to say, Ada, if you want to, please do quickly introduce yourself to the rest of us. And also Richard joined us, although he used the chat to let us know that he's in an open space office where it's not as easy to speak up.
Okay.
So this shall be his introduction.
Okay.
Ada, what about you? Hi.
So,
Ada, can you hear us?
yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear me now.
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so I'm from Uruguay, and right now I'm working at the University of the Republic, but at Rocha, and I'm from the virtual unit of learning and teaching here in Rocha, Uruguay.
All right.
I'm also doing a PhD now, which is about complexity and a philosophical view of complexity as a frame to explore virtual and virtual communities of teachers.
Wonderful, very valuable. Thank you.
And I know Catherine from a project. We're working on a research project called Praxis.
Yes.
And we are working on open with teachers, trying to explore about open learning and sharing and collaboration.
Okay, thanks very much.
I'm curious
Just joined us.
folks. Just joined. I don't see anyone. So were you guys, did anyone get a chance to see the tweets or anything that you caught from the keynotes that you want to talk about or ask about? Or any reactions to what we've said so far?
I woke up this morning and just checked the Twitter feed a little bit. So I saw some tweets, but I didn't have time yet to look at the actual talks, but there seemed to be a lot of engagement. I noticed that you guys were bringing in an interest in or a perspective on participatory culture, or Catherine, I think that was you that brought that in. I thought that was really interesting, especially the qualifier that was put before, which is, I think, an interesting thing. And Maha, you said something about that you had, for the first time, picked up on that qualifier as a sort of more recent conversation. Yeah.
Participatory culture stuff all the time. I never saw this.
Yeah.
I noticed that they started to mention equity a lot more in recent years.
Yes.
But I didn't see the increasingly participatory culture thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that the way you framed it that made it more obvious to me?
No, it's actually explicitly dealt with in the second book
article.
Well, it's in the book,
in the book,
by Henry Jenkins and Mia Dana Boyd, and Mimi, sorry. But I'll say for Ada's sake, this is the value of doing the PhD, is because you actually
right, you're familiar with all of the recent.
I don't think I've read a whole book from back.
I must say, it's my second PhD. It's my second one. I'm doing it all over again. It's a different subject. I'm a paleontologist, but this is a different subject.
And I also noticed that, Alec, in your presentation, you sort of made a thread between what you're doing and some of the points that Howard Reingold was making, I think in NetSmart. Is that right? There was some, or Catherine, maybe you were tweeting about Alec's presentation. I'm sorry, it's not, I'm going to find it so I can ground it a little bit more securely, clearly.
Yes.
Yeah.
You just shared in the workshop,
some of the attention literacy. We talked about some strategies before.
Attention literacy. That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's I talked about a bunch of a number of the first the problems, right?
Yeah.
Like why can't we verify fake news and so on? And information abundance is a big deal, and beyond that, it's what attention do we pay? What do we pay attention to, and how little attention we actually have in the first place. And so that was, I gave some tool strategies, but people came up with a lot of other reasons.
I was surprised that a lot of what you mentioned were tools. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting, I don't know if I expected something mind-shattering, because probably if there was, we don't know.
For attention,
but
meditation,
looking at Catherine, and
mindfulness. I mean, I
looked at Catherine, I'm like, I can't do it. I'm like, I just put my phone away.
Yeah.
But what else do? I do nothing. I can't do it. Even if I'm focusing on my child, I have 100 thoughts racing through my head.
The way I used to use a tool called Write Room, which was like a Mac. It would take me back to sort of a black screen, green text, like an Apple IIe that I used to have, and I used to write on there. So it actually turns off the internet, gives you just that sort of old experience of typing on and that was for me when I actually wrote. But now it's more difficult because I'm constantly trying to reference things, and then I reference things and I read a bit, I never come back to what I'm writing. And so it's that rabbit hole of information that just like, this is much more interesting than what I'm writing. So
the video of the meerkats and the sloth.
Yeah, there's a great, if you Google single tasking is the new multitasking, Atlantic video, which I think is really great too. That gives you a good example of what the average person comes up to in terms of like, I'm going to research this topic. And when you research that topic, you end up, ending up on Facebook and checking out what your girlfriend's doing and whatever else. Like it just really kind of an interesting rabbit hole of attention, but it's a really humorous way of looking at it. And I've used it a number of times with my undergrads just to get them to think about what they pay attention to, how quickly they lose attention, and just that metacognitive space. I think it's really important to discuss attention with them. Discuss the concept of attention, that it's not something that we can't control. It's something that is actually within our abilities to control and improve.
I've been experimenting with a technique called the Pomodoro method, which is basically, it's a 25-minute clock for people that don't know. But I get it in the browser. I get this little countdown clock. I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to be there because this is that one task for that 25 minutes that I'm supposed to do. And then also trying to switch between modalities of I'm just curating bookmarks for research versus, all right, now that I have everything I found, now I want to dive in deep. And that's been helping me a little bit. Like I'll just save a bookmark, save a bookmark, save a bookmark. And then when I go down, sit down and write, you know, annotate those readings, then do the writing. And I've been finding that works, but yeah, I'm still the same way. But some of those rabbit holes are amazingly awesome. Like, I don't want to cut them off. But the things that we can find in our distraction are also really wonderful learning opportunities. So I don't want to just say that we don't want to do that too.
But you know, what's really interesting about those things is that, you know, one of the things that came up in the student partnership workshop this morning was, you know, power differential within an institution between instructors and students, faculty and students, and that we're trying to address that, and, you know, explicitly and in our own reflection. But this kind of thing about, you know, struggling with attention or struggling with deciding whether and how to be open are such great things to share with students, because it's not like that work is ever done, right? I mean, it's just, we struggle with it also. So I think these are really great kinds of things to share in the context of teaching, because it just helps to level and saying, hey, this is something that we're all struggling with. What do you do that works? And this is what I do. And, you know, I think those can be very powerful, you know, discussions. They don't take a long time, but it just kind of, it puts everything on the table and says, yeah, we haven't got this sorted out either.
I really like that single tasking is the new multitasking, and I'm definitely going to Google it, Alec. And I'm kind of thinking that when I notice in my own behavior that when I reduce the amount of channels that are coming at me, whether it be, you know, my husband texting from the next room to ask about whether we paid that bill while I'm trying to write the email, plus I'm also reading something, I realize if I reduce the amount of signals coming in, that's when I start to make really interesting connections. And that's what fuels all of my work, is like connections that aren't necessarily, I mean, with people, but also with ideas. So I think there is something to be said that's really important about the empowerment we need to gather for ourselves with at least reducing our distractions and being on top of it somehow, being aware that we're being distracted, that kind of thing.
I like how you used the word a couple of times, like connection was in two different modes. You talked about connection in this big, vast network connection, but also that deeper connection. And I think that's kind of an interesting idea, the degrees of connectiveness. Like the Stephen Johnson version, that chance favors the connected man. That's sort of like to this idea of, I'm really connecting with someone. So I think that's really important to open up that idea, what connecting actually means to us, and the degrees and variance of it, and the environment that's necessary to maintain or retain a particular connection.
Yes, exactly.
Two things I actually wanted to say on this topic, and just like, because it's just, you know, a suggestion, something that I recently discovered. This guy called Sebastian Marshall, who does this ultra working thing. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So he does this ultra working thing where he helps people just basically work more productively. And at first I was very, you know, skeptical, but I listened to a couple of the podcasts that he does. One of them is called Motivation Monday, and it's just maybe like, you know, about all sorts of things. But he went on there one time and he explained the concept, and I went and listened to. He has this concept called work cycles, where you basically design your day in a way that you work in certain cycles, and you can decide what these cycles are. And he has like a template spreadsheet to help you with all of that stuff, and you can work with it. Like the link gets you to directly copy it into your own, and it's pre-planned and set up and formatted to help you carry over stuff. And what he's saying is that work cycles are either 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, sort of a little bit like the Pomodoro technique that Greg was talking about. But then he's saying if you ever get distracted, it will only be until that 30-minute mark. You won't go into like these 2-hour stretch of like, you know, distractions. And he was also saying, because he has a video that explains the method of how to do this, he was saying I would set up the first one, because a lot of stuff he does is blog and write, you know, and link to other things online. He said the very first part, or if I need to be distracted and connected and lose myself in this distraction so I could learn, I would have one of my cycles for that. But then it would only be like 30 or 40 minutes, and then I would move to the other one. And the really cool thing is that he has this part where that measures your own energy and motivation, and so that you see, you know, the more productive you are, the higher the energy is and all that. And I was really skeptical until I tried it. It's pretty cool. I could share the link with you guys. And one other thing I wanted to actually ask Alec at some point during the conference, but as much as you guys, I didn't really get that much of a chance to talk to him as well, because everybody was talking to him. He was talking a lot about the digital practices and how you can teach with digital pedagogy in your class. And so many of the examples that he used were really cool, because I also teach educational technology to my students. But he was talking a lot about these activities and assignments that lend themselves to digital. But because our, at least at AUC, a lot of the faculty are very skeptical about digital practices and digital activities, because they're like, oh, this would only work for the humanities, or this would only work for literature classes where you can write online and talk to other people online. And a lot of the sciences and engineering faculty are very skeptical about this kind of thing, about using digital types of assignments and digital pedagogy. So I was wondering how you would go about talking to people like that, and not people like that in a bad way, but like, how would you inspire them to take this forward in disciplines that don't easily, from their own culture or tradition, lend themselves to this online, digital, connected practices?
So as soon as you thought of that, I thought of things that I've done recently. So have you ever heard of TikTok? TikTok?
No.
So TikTok's like the new Vine. But what's interesting is, so this is, I'll see if I can show it. There's this little dance that you can sort of see.
Oh, I know that, the floss.
Right. Well, this is more than the floss. It's like a whole different thing. So it's this viral meme, and what TikTok is, and not to get too much into the technical thing, from here I can actually click on the music, and then I can see everyone who's remixed to this particular, like once you click on the music, you can see everyone, and there's lists, hundreds and hundreds, who have basically danced to that song. And when you see that, what's interesting and beyond that, and I often bookmark a lot of these things. So then the next person might take this up in an artistic mode. So you'll see it in a second. So you can start to see it there. So it's the same dance, but someone takes it up in a very different way. And so this is just a simple meme that takes up multiple dimensions and crosses into all sorts of different disciplines. And it's really kind of an interesting piece where this is a beautiful, this app in many ways is a beautiful way to actually see what participatory culture looks like. Because it's one particular thread that shows like hundreds and hundreds of examples of the same sort of creativity, sort of like what Cogdog did with DS, or what Cogdog and others did with the not the DS-106, but the daily, which was inspired by the daily shoot. I think DS. It was a daily shoot. I think it was called, a Twitter account before that. But everyone has a project, and everyone does the same thing. But TikTok's a great example of that. But I think, like, I went to a conference not too long ago, and I made every teacher dance to this song and learn it, and think about, what does this mean for, like, you're uncomfortable in learning this? When's the last time you learned something new that you went out of your comfort zone? So it's just, I don't know if that answered your question at all, but ultimately it's this idea of showing lots of examples and trying to find, like, where can you participate in this way? How can you, do you even know what your students are doing? How are we honoring and respecting their types of spaces that they work in and that they're creative in on an everyday basis? And I think just recognizing, this works really with a new literacy studies piece, is that one of the key tenets is that, and especially when you look at multiple identities, is thinking that students actually bring all sorts of literacies that we don't even pay attention to into our spaces, and we just don't give any reverence or respect to them. And that can be linguistic or musical or whatever it might be, all sorts of different literacies. And so I think just getting to know these and to start to qualify knowing in such a much greater range, knowing, performing, assessment, whatever else in such a greater range gets us to the beginning of that, I guess. Anyway,
I think it's okay to acknowledge that some methods of open pedagogy work better in ill-defined domains versus well-defined domains, and that people with specific ontological views towards open might find themselves migrating more towards humanities rather than, say, well-defined domains of physics. Like, because I know I could show that TikTok video with the physics professor and go, yeah, but how's that going to teach me Newton's law? Like,
right.
I don't need to teach my students to dance. I need them to know how to use Bohr's law to figure out this equation. And so I figured, like, and I struggle with this too, because it's also that mindset, like, that's a rational, humanistic, Kantian mindset versus, like, I'm not going to go out and start throwing in, different I'm not going to bring in, I don't know. I'm struggling with that too, is my basic, because I run into that too, because we do know, like, when you have very discrete content that must be mastered, yeah, sometimes direct instruction is going to be better at that efficacy than trying to learn that through self-discovery.
I've seen some of the stuff that you're doing around, STEM disciplines and everything. I think it's really interesting. And my background is in STEM. I often call myself a recovering engineer, and I taught in IT for a long time. So, I'm really familiar with that notion of, this is like a discrete body of knowledge. It's very binary, literally. It works or it doesn't. But I always did, and that's the domain in which I became an open educator, because I really focused it more on communicating. No matter what field you're in, you will be presenting your work to people, outside of your discipline. So you'll be communicating that work. You'll be applying for funding, for your work, whether you're in a nonprofit or a multinational corporation. So what are the spaces that people communicate it? They are networked publics. So we need to be able to, know whatever you're working on that you want to communicate, or you want to communicate to potential people who might fund your project. What are the tools and spaces that you might communicate effectively about that, and how can you choose them? They change all the time. So we all have to develop those literacies to be able to do that. So, I was always very clear that this applied, not perhaps as a disciplinary practitioner as such, but as someone beyond that discipline out in the world. So I think it's essential. So that's kind of the way that I got to it.
I mean, I also think there's one thing. I think a lot of us, when we talk about STEM disciplines, we're talking about the introductory courses. But in the more advanced you get, it is less clear cut. Like this morning, or was it yesterday, someone was saying about physics being laws that you follow. And I'm like, actually, there are different theories, and they contradict, and it's actually quite a messy discipline afterwards. And so as you get more advanced in the field, there will be more opportunities where the digital and this communication thing applies to everything.
Exactly.
It's not, you might not go there to find the answer to a particular type of question or to do an experiment, but you might go to connect with other physicists and see what's happening. And like someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson is a physicist, and he's on Twitter. So you might be able to talk to him, for example, or someone maybe less high profile, but that's something that's not very discipline specific. And also, in every discipline, you express yourselves in ways that now technology allows you to express yourself in better ways, right? So learning how to do these things will, at some point, a lot of it is still
re-expressing your knowledge in various ways is a great way of, those. I mean, it's the Einsteinian notion of being able to explain something like you would as simply as possible, right? And I think that's, for people who actually take up that's a great opportunity for media to think of how concisely and simply I can actually represent what I know about a particular topic. And I think that's where that's lots of great ways of whether they're short summaries or having a 5-minute constraint of some sort to take up a topic, to explain it at various levels. I mean, I love the YouTube videos of explaining it to a 5-year-old, a high school student, a grad student, someone who's postdoc or whatever else. And I think that's, again, playing with media. It's a beautiful expression of the way of understanding of what we know. And so I think that could be right across disciplines.
And I'll just add that I think writing is really important to the acquisition of any knowledge. And so to have students writing, but having them write in a digital space is just a way to get them to really establish a foundation for the field. So just blogging and then syndicating that blogging to a shared space, I think those are really powerful ways to use digital literacies, but also cover content and interpretation in, kind of elementary ways, or not elementary, but in traditional ways.
And to raise the bar for their writing, public spaces, there's a higher expectation, or there should be a higher expectation for what students write. And it could be, of course, the teacher has to take that seriously because there's a higher expectation. There might be greater anxiety as well, and greater scrutiny, depending on how that looks at. Hopefully, your public is forgiving, especially.
I see great.
Think about open science. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just seeing great conversation, and I'd like to invite more participation from everyone.
we can think about open science too as well, like versus open pedagogy. Like, yeah, well, just is your data set out there? Are you just writing that general, like, to me, open pedagogy starts with that reflection. Like, I've been really concentrating on this idea of like, man, what if reflection and not argumentative writing became the cornerstone of education? Like, why does winning the argument, like, why do we define that as the highest level? And just reflecting on what you're learning in those well-defined domains, like in physics, like, oh, well, going back to I've been struggling with Weeks for Bohr's law. I just figured it out. Here's how. It just like that reflective practice and the evidence trail that brings up to me is so much better to prove that student mastered the content than oh, well, you lost 3 points on your Bohr's head because you forgot to put the right label on your answer. That's where I think we can get into the open pedagogy in terms of those well-defined domains. Just learn out loud. Like, let's define it that way and share that data. Although, you know, it's easier. I'm not in the medical sciences. None of my inventions could be worth billions of dollars. So it's hard to tell somebody in, you know, pharmaceuticals, hey, you should release all your data openly. Well, that data could be worth billions someday. Nobody's going to sell my work for billions ever. But, so
in Canada, we have, I mean, I'm sure this happens in other jurisdictions as well, but any of our government-sponsored funding has to be open, and then by I think next year, the data has to be open as well. So that's come a bit later, but it's good to see what we call our Tri-Council in Canada to make that mandatory, and it startled a lot of people who are ultimately want to monetize or trademark some of that data, but well, if the public purse is funding it, I think it's an obligation to put it open. I think it's a great idea. Beyond the ethical,
Ada made some points in the chat as well about like sharing data and sharing work on social media, and now she's also jumping in the chat that it's not also the need to participate with the students around you, but the teachers as well. So how do you incorporate that in teaching, I think is one of the questions that he would say, but I'm sure, Ada, you could make a much better point than I can.
No, I was just thinking, sorry about my English, it's early here in Uruguay, I'm not so accustomed to speak. So, but I was thinking about that Catherine was sharing earlier this morning about the students. And I was thinking that we need to participate the teachers also, because we're not accustomed to share our work in social media and to discuss and to engage in this kind of talks with people. I think we're not accustomed to do this with people from abroad, and not so much with people in Uruguay. We're trying to work with this and to start engaging teachers and doing webinars and kinds of things like this. But I think we have a lot of work to do in that way in Uruguay, and of course in particular in higher education. I think that was my point.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So we're working.
Yes.
A bit earlier, Richard, who can't really speak because he's in that open office, sorry about that, Richard, had a question as well about the way that you have to make sure, I think it was the point, please do nod or shake your head, Richard, if I'm getting this wrong, about making the Einstein quote, basically. So trying to explain something in a way that is approachable to different kinds of people. And he makes the point that it kind of is the same in every discipline, I think. And it is in terms of like the principles that you follow, it might differ, but in the end, it comes down to that very thing. So being able to understand something only if you're able to explain it in a brief way, so that somebody in the elevator will be able to get that. So Richard, I'm not sure if I can point us towards the question that you have there. But you also went into detail in terms of like the density, I think, of the subject that we're referring to. So you folks on site or folks virtually might be able to elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, I'll put my microphone on for a minute because it's gone a bit quieter here. Yeah, it was basically agreeing with what was being said at the time, that we were talking about STEM subjects and comparison to more well, history, geography, other types of subjects, and really thinking that essentially there isn't really a difference. In history, you start by learning the facts, and then it leads on to the evidence and the interpretation, and then it was about the physics, and yeah, it starts with laws, but you then talk to someone like Brian Cox or someone, and they take physics beyond what most of us know about laws of physics and into theory and interpretation. Then it's just a question of level. The actual communication is the same. Some of it might be done by undergraduates, some of it by postgraduates, some of it by doctors, but basically the communication side of it, to me, there isn't really a difference between subjects.
Thanks, Richard. It's a great point.
And we've also been joined by Hoda. Hoda, I had to mute you because there was some background noise, but please do unmute yourself and introduce yourself if you want to.
Just come here.
She's on her way, I think.
Yeah, she's on her way to here.
Oh, okay.
She's muted, but she doesn't realize that. Although you're muted, we can't.
Okay.
She's showing us AUC, which I think you guys haven't seen properly.
Yes.
You've gone to our offices at all?
No.
Wow.
We should walk them to our office because I need to.
Yeah. How much more time do you have? You're probably on the run to the next session and to checking out the AUC campus, right?
Well, we're finished for the day. Alex is leaving at 2 a.m. like tonight to leave, so not much more time. And I'm leaving early in the morning, but
so quick.
So quick, but I was a little more fortunate than Alec because my husband came along with me.
I saw that. Hamish is there too.
I asked him, Maha had said there was a space and if anyone in your family likes to come, and I must have asked him in a weak moment because he said yes. The moment we arrived, we were both so grateful because we spent Saturday, as was the one day off, seeing the pyramids and Cairo, and it was actually very moving. And you know, at the end of that day, already talking about the fact that we'd love to come back again. So, and part of that is just
amazing
action here. It's been so wonderful. So,
since we've been talking a lot about fake news, and we know that 70% of it comes from 8 websites, and 4 of them are owned by Facebook. Do we have a moral obligation to try to push our learners and our faculty off of platforms like Facebook, which have a long now evidence path that these are not good companies, not good for learning? They're not, I mean, they're engaged in practices that are borderline criminal and evil. Do we think, but at the same time, they also open up connections in ways to people that have never been possible in history. So how do we leverage that good with the bad? I mean, these are, when you look at what Facebook has been doing in the last 5 years, and they're responsible for almost all of the fake news. Nobody hacked Facebook. They used it exactly as it was meant to be used. It's not, the Russians didn't hack it. They used Facebook the way that Facebook designed Facebook to be used. So do we have a moral obligation to try to get people to quit social media?
I have one thing to say, and I'd love to throw it open. I am speaking about someone who never used Facebook, so I didn't have to leave Facebook. So it would be very easy for me to say, I can't believe you guys all did that and whatever. but from getting back to what I was speaking to earlier around intercultural understanding and understanding structural inequality, there are people who did decide to use Facebook, who network on Facebook in ways that are fundamental to their lives, their families' lives, their communities, their activism and other ways. So we have no right to say to other people that it is evil, get off it. We do have an obligation to educate and to share what we know. but we could never say to someone that they must make any particular choice either for or against, but we absolutely have to engage in education. That's my own personal feeling, and I think it's too easy to say to everyone that, you know, you must get off. We have no right. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I would also just quickly throw in an addition. Completely agree with everything you said, Catherine, but some of us are in a position where we can actually work for an alternative that kind of works for with a different power dynamics and tries to work towards a different goal. And so the one thing is to educate, certainly, but some of us are in a position to work towards a different kind of idea of what connecting online means. And I think we should strive towards that as well.
I 100% agree. Could you say a little bit about your work, Christian? I mean, because you made a choice like this in the last couple of years, didn't you?
I have.
Yeah, so I think you should share that in case people don't know.
No, I don't think I'm in a great position to like talk about me being myself an example in that way. But I think we all as we do work in education to some point. I don't think anybody got in education, for example, or in the NGO business or whatever, to become rich and famous. I think it's all, to some extent, everybody who teaches has some kind of an initial ideal that they want to follow, and it's very much in line of what we just said, I think. And sometimes what just happens that gets lost in the way, I think. And it's also our obligation to like remind ourselves of why we came into this one, what we are getting up for in the morning, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to be the bad guy here and just like say we have to go. I know these folks have a lot to do, and I have to take off as well. So does Maha. But we're very, very happy to be seeing you guys today, and thank you all for making the time to connect with Alec and Catherine.
Thank you so much for making the time. Ada also reminded us in the chat that this is the start of Open Education Week, so I just wanted to throw this in there.
Start of Open Education Week.
Open Education.
Thank you, Ada.
There's a lot of online.
Thanks for making the time. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
You guys can keep talking a little bit if you want.
Yeah, we will stay online a bit.
Good wishes from Cairo.
Take care.
Bye.
So we'll walk you over. You say,